whoever carried this out. It appears from what the reporting that Bryn and some of our other team in New York are getting is that this person possibly set off this smoke grenade to obscure them fleeing the scene. And so the question is, how did they get out? The scene there is very, very well covered with surveillance cameras. Perhaps that is a bit obscured by the smoke, but we know that that is exactly what the NYPD and the FBI is looking for right now, to try to figure out where this person went, what direction they fled, and then to essentially carry out a manhunt across the area to find the person who carried this out. It always obviously raises the possibility of terrorism. We don't know yet what's the cause of this, Kate, and so that's one of the big questions for officials here in Washington is, what are we dealing with? Is it a terrorist attack? Is it something that is more localized in New York, given the fact that obviously we know there is a lot of gun violence that we see in New York and in cities around the country. Kate?
Absolutely. Evan, thank you so much. We're going to be getting back to Evan as he talks with his sources as well. President Biden has been briefed on the subway attack in New York. Let's go to the White House. John Harwood standing by with more on this. John, what are you hearing from there?
Kate, this had been a day when President Biden hoped to call attention to his efforts to tame inflation, tame gas prices. Of course, unfavorable government report on inflation today. He's about in a few minutes to leave the White House here, fly to Iowa to suspend a regulation related to ethanol, trying to bring gas prices down. But that's been completely overtaken by the news from New York City. We got a tweet from Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, a few minutes ago. She said POTUS has been briefed on the latest developments regarding the New York City subway shooting. White House senior staff are in touch with Mayor Adams and Police Commissioner Sewell to offer any assistance as needed. We have not heard from the president directly, but I'd be surprised if we don't hear from him as he leaves the White House in a few minutes to head to Iowa. Of course, a consistent theme from President Biden and fellow Democrats has been steps by Congress to curb gun violence. He announced some regulatory steps earlier in the week. We will see what he has to say about that, and also whether he has any information that would shed more light on the question that you've been raising and our colleagues have been raising. Was this an act of terrorism or was it something else, Kate?
Yeah. All right, John, we'll stick close to you as well. He's John Harwood standing by at the White House for us. Joining me right now, we're going to be looking at these live pictures, these two cameras from the sky and from the ground of the scene in Brooklyn. And as we do that, let me bring in right now CNN senior law enforcement analyst Charles Ramsey. He's, of course, the former Philadelphia police commissioner and former D.C. police chief. And CNN law enforcement analyst Jonathan Wackrow. He's a former Secret Service agent. So, Chief, let me start with you. 2.5 hours since this happened. What do you see right now? What are you thinking about this at this point?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of good information that's being come in. The last witness was interviewed on the previous show. Hopefully, it's going to be briefed by the NYPD. And just let me say, anyone who may have witnessed anything, be sure you contact the police. It's important that you provide that information. But 2.5 hours now, they're still gathering a lot of information. Listen, there's a lot of speculation and a lot of things we don't know, but I can tell you one thing right now. The NYPD, as well as FBI, and all those that are actually working the case, know a lot more than we do. And we'll hear some of that in this press conference that's coming up. They'll put out as much as they can without jeopardizing the investigation. But the fact that nothing has happened since that is a good indication that this is going to be an isolated incident. We still don't know the motive or anything like that, but it is good to know that perhaps it's just the isolated incident and not part of some large planned attack.
That's a good point, Chief. Jonathan, what are you thinking? What are the questions you have as this press conference will be beginning soon? What are your questions right now?
Well, one is motive. Who is this individual? Where is the individual right now? I want to know what were the precipitating actions. What was this person doing on the subway beforehand? Was there any type of specific catalyst that caused this event? But I just looking at these images, Kate, I think it's really important for the viewer to understand. We're seeing a multi-jurisdictional response to this incident in New York, and this is something that first responders, both the NYPD, their other local counterparts, as well as federal law enforcement, has trained for time and time again in New York. So while the viewer may see a lot of people standing around, it may seem a little bit chaotic. This is a very coordinated response led by the NYPD. It follows an incident command structure. And I'm sure that during this press conference that's coming up, we're going to hear from the public information officers exactly what every single responding jurisdiction is doing, what their roles and responsibilities are. One, to mitigate what the initial incident, mitigate that incident, but also what are they doing to find this suspect or suspects that currently remain at large.
Absolutely. And Chief, I mean, there is a pretty extensive system of cameras throughout New York City. How important is that going to be right now? What do they need from it?
Critically important. There's no question about that. I don't know if we have cameras actually on the train or not. Some jurisdictions do actually have cameras on the various train cars. But once they identify a person of interest, they'll start going back to see where did that person get on the train? Where did they get off? Where did they go after they got off? They'll be able to kind of piece together through video the actions, the movement of the individual, both before and after the attack. So the cameras are invaluable and save an awful lot of investigative time that normally would have been very difficult to piece all that together without cameras.
Jonathan, they're looking for a man in an orange construction vest. Witnesses say that they believe that he was wearing gas mask as well. I mean, I venture to guess he's no longer wearing either of those things. So how does a manhunt like that work in a place in New York City?
Well, listen, it's that individual where it may seem anomalous to be wearing some sort of like day-glow orange vest and having a mask these days. You see, this was occurring during commuting hours. So you have a lot of people in the construction industry wearing the same clothes. We don't know if it was a gas mask. Well, remember, we're in the middle of COVID. It could have been a respirator mask. So there's a lot of unknowns here. But to Commissioner Ramsey's point, there's a lot of video evidence, especially coming in and out of the transit systems and then throughout New York City. So NYPD detectives and their law enforcement partners right now are trying to piece together, identify that suspect on video and then trace their movements to try to track that person down. We also have, witnesses that their statements are going to be critical to locating this individual and identifying who they are. And now we also have potential ballistic information. So that's where you see like the ATF working with the NYPD to try to figure out, again, that's another part or another piece of evidence that is going to be put together very rapidly to try to identify who this individual was and what was the motive. Was this an act of terror or something else?
And you're talking about eyewitness accounts and them being able to help identify or give a better description. Chief, we heard last hour one eyewitness who was on board the train when the shootings happened and the smoke filled at least one train car. He said he didn't actually he said he couldn't see anything because of the smoke. What do you think of just that fact that we're hearing from this eyewitness?
Well, he's not going to be the only one that say something like that. I mean, you have to remember when these things happen suddenly, very unexpected. There's a lot of chaos. You don't really know what you're seeing or what you're experiencing at the time. And that's why it's important that a trained investigator actually have a chance to interview all the people who were on that train. I think it was the third car number 3, whatever. So if they weren't interviewed, they need to contact them because they need to be able to pull information out of them. But eyewitnesses can sometimes provide inaccurate information. That's why video is going to be so critical in trying to put this together. Now, the victims, people actually shot, may be able to provide even more information than people who were just passengers on the train. They were, some of them may have been a lot closer to the actual shooter than other individuals. And we've seen before the smoke was actually released, perhaps, or they might even know the person.
Absolutely. You can just imagine the chaos in that train car. And then once those doors opened onto the station, you can just imagine what they were going through. Guys, if you could stick with me, please. I want to get back to Bryn Gingras. She's on the scene. We're awaiting this press conference, Bryn.
Stand by.
What are you hearing? What are you hearing about how soon it's going to be coming?
Yeah, Kay, it should be momentarily. We're actually hearing the governor is likely here on the scene as well. So there are just going to be a number of people. I think they're gathering together to get to this press conference and give the information that they give out right now. And I know you've been talking about it, Kate, but this suspect is still on the loose. I've been talking to a few sources here on the ground. I know that they are sharing a description to the best of their knowledge with each other that is going out within the law enforcement agencies to try to find this perpetrator, because again, that is the main thing right now, is locating that person. So much information still needs to be pieced together. That's what we're hoping to get from this news conference. When did this start? As far as what train station, when did it end? Exactly how many people are we talking about as victims here? How serious are the injuries? Exactly what happened on board that train? Of course, we heard from that eyewitness. I've also been hearing from sources that, as you mentioned with one of your analysts, video is big here. They are just combing this area and around this area, a very big radius, looking for video of where this perpetrator possibly headed to in efforts to locate them. So yeah, right now we are just seeing a lot of people get together near the podium behind us to get this press conference on board, but there are a lot of agencies we expect to hear from momentarily.
All right, Bryn, we will be getting right back to you. Joining me on the phone right now is former NYPD Commissioner Bill Bratton. Commissioner, thank you so much for calling in. What do you think of all of this? What are you hearing?
Well, it's getting a little clearer as to what transpired this morning versus the early preliminary reports. It appears that a N train pulling into 34th Street Station in Brooklyn, that something occurred on that train that involves a smoke device as well as a shooting. Latest reporting that I've heard is that there were 8 people injured, possibly shot. That's down from 14, as they reported a while ago. As you are reporting, there's a massive coordinated investigation underway. Authorities are attempting to put together a press conference to give preliminary information, what they know, who they might be looking for. And so we're all waiting to see what they're going to put out for preliminary information. But the impact on the city today and going forward is going to be enormous. Confusion on the train today, certainly, but fear of the subway is going to be expanded exponentially. There was already a great deal of fear about riding the subways with a 68% rise in crime, but this is going to make the difficulty of getting people back on those subways even more difficult.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the big questions, as you said, the number of people injured and shot. We will hear a more definitive number when we hear from the police, when they, from the commissioner and from all of the officials when they come out for this press conference. But can you also just take us inside? You talked about the massive coordinated response. We see just the mass of law enforcement on the scene. I just saw some video of it looked like officials heading back into the subway, into the subway station. Take me inside. What is the police commissioner doing right now?
Right now, that she is working with her leadership team. The NYPD is an extraordinary department, no better department prepared for an event like this and the complexity of an event like this with the massive resources, but also they're strengthened by the ongoing collaborative relationships they have with a lot of the city agencies, fire, emergency services, but as importantly, in this incident, so they determine is it a crime or is it a terrorist act? Coordination with the FBI, ATF, Joint Terrorism Task Force. Right now, the NYPD is the lead agency because it's being treated as a crime until they determine whether it's an act of terrorism or not. And so the police commissioner is getting briefed. She will look at the scene itself. So when she gets on the press conference, the mayor, as we know, is in isolation because of COVID. She will attempt to calm fears by putting out as much factual information as they have at the moment. Hopefully they might have information on a potential suspect or suspects who they're looking for, enlist the public to see something, say something. And there's multi-initiatives underway. Scanning of social media, was there a threat prior to this event? Are there individuals that they may have had concern with who could have engaged in this type of activity? Phenomenal number of witnesses, which adds both to the complexity of the investigation, but the confusion. Different people seeing different things. That earlier we heard a report that the suspect may have been wearing a MTA uniform. Then we heard it might have been a construction uniform. Then we heard he might have been wearing a gas mask. So that's just an example of the confusion that these types of events create in the initial stages. So the best thing at this point in time is to wait for the officials to do their press conference so we got confirmation on what is known at this time as this massive investigation goes forward.
Absolutely. Commissioner, if you could stick with us. We've just learned that the press conference will be taking place in just about 10 minutes. We're going to take a quick break to get some more information.
Tous les jours, du lundi au vendredi, suivez sur nos plateformes en ligne Zoom IT News, nos différentes éditions de nouvelles en provenance d'Haïti et partout ailleurs. Pas besoin d'attendre des heures pour être informé. Zoom IT est là et vous présente l'information en temps réel. À votre disposition, des professionnels. Rejoignez-nous sur Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. Informez-vous sur notre site internet www.zoomitnews.com. Les infos sont disponibles en 104 langues. Partout où il y a des Haïtiens, nous sommes là. Zoom IT News. L'humain avant tout.
Zoom IT News et Caribbean Television Network, plus de 10 sites internet en anglais, français, espagnol et plus d'une centaine d'autres langues. Désormais, vous n'avez plus besoin d'un ordinateur ou d'un téléphone portable. Il suffit de demander à Alexa.
Alexa, what are the latest news from the Caribbean Television Network?
From Caribbean Television Network News. From Zoom Haiti News Daily.
En Zoom Haiti News, français.
En Zoom Haiti News espagnol.
Caribbean Television Network, en français, anglais et espagnol. Vous pouvez aussi télécharger les applications de Zoom IT News en créole, français, anglais et espagnol. Visitez notre site internet sur www.caribbeantelevisionnetwork.com. Chaque jour, branchez Zoom Haiti News à Caribbean Television Network sous Roku et Amazon TV Fire. Ou joindre nous tous sur ZHN Live, avec CTN Live, dans Roku, avec Amazon TV Fire. Ou pas gain télévision? Al droite sous Apple Store ou bien Google Store, téléchargez l'application Roku. L'offre télécharger l'application ça, ou chercher ZHN Live. Ou joindre même channel ça tout dans Amazon TV Fire. Pas hésiter à abonner à la chaîne YouTube nous. Et puis suivre nous tous sur Facebook, dans Zoom IT News, à Caribbean Television Network.
Alexa, what are the latest news from the Caribbean Television Network?
From Caribbean Television Network News. Even in his inability to lead, Ariel Henry enjoys the support of the United States. From Zoom Haiti News Daily. The Assistant Secretary of State for International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs, Todd D. Robinson, reiterated the United States' support for the Haitian government in the fight against insecurity.
Zoom Haiti News, français. L'ex-ministre de l'Agriculture, des Ressources naturelles et du Développement rural, David Nicolas, est mort.
En Zoom Haiti News español. El gobierno de Biden agradece la colaboración de las autoridades haitianas en la gestión del expediente de migrantes irregulares devueltos al país.
Vous voulez toujours été informé sur ce qui passe en Haïti tant qu'à l'étranger? Un seul rendez-vous. Zoom Haiti News à Caribbean Television Network.
Ou pas jamais devant deux situations, par contre, qui ça pour faire? Qui ça pour choisir?
Mais ça son dilemme. Dilemme dans couple, dilemme dans famille. Dilemme, c'est une émission débat sentimental sur une série de sujets tabous dans la société noire. Dilemme, c'est une émission morale côté d'un parler de ça qui est normal et ça qui pas normal, ça nous capable accepter et ça nous pas droit accepter dans une relation. Relez-nous, voyez message pour participer. Rendez-vous chaque samedi soir à 10h sur page Facebook Zoom IT News avec Miss Lamou, Léonie Desroses. En nous parler de dilemme yo et joindre une solution ensemble. Tout dilemme, c'est dilemme. Pas oublier. Chaque samedi soir, 10h, Dilemme, Facebook.com.
All right, we're continuing to follow the breaking news out of Brooklyn and New York City. We are looking, you're going to show you, this is the live scene A massive scene. Police say at least 5 people were shot, and in all, at least 13 people hurt at the subway station in Brooklyn. We're going to show you some video. You can see the chaotic scene inside the station, inside the train car, smoke filling the train car that one eyewitness said happened as shots rang out. There's a manhunt underway for the gunman, who witnesses say was seen wearing an orange construction vest and a gas mask. We're expecting to hear from city officials in just minutes. We're going to bring that to you live because there are obviously a ton of questions as this investigation is getting underway. Let's get to the scene. Let's get back to Bryn Gingras. She's in Brooklyn. Bryn, what's the very latest from there?
Yeah, Kate, it's just to be honest with you, a little bit of chaotic scene. There was so much press here that the NYPD press office is really just trying to figure out how to coordinate this press conference right now because of just the massive presence, not only press, but also law enforcement officials here on the scene. But yes, there is a number of agencies we are expecting to hear from once we get this news conference underway, including the ATF, possibly FBI, of course, the NYPD, and
you guys think you gotta get back.
A number of agencies we're expecting to hear from to hopefully get an update about the sequence of events of exactly what happened.
Hey, Bryn, real quick, Bryn. Hey, it's really loud around you. Can you get the mic any closer to your mouth?
Yes.
Sorry. Thank you.
I think you can possibly see me too here.
Yeah,
Sorry.
you're great. Thank you, Bryn.
It's a little bit chaotic, like I said. All right. Yeah. So as soon as we start this press conference, again, we're expecting to hear from a number. Okay. Great. A number of agencies. Okay, let me send it back to you. I'm sorry.
Let's do that. There's clearly what happens quite often, just to let everyone know, is this: they set up for these press conferences in any investigation where there's a lot of reporters on the ground. It's a very busy scene where they're trying to set it up quickly and safely. And what it seems like is they're moving all the reporters, moving all the journalists to a different location, and Bryn's in the thick of it. So we're going to get back to Bryn and to that press conference because it will be getting underway very shortly, we believe. Back with me now is Chief Charles Ramsey, as well as Jonathan Wackrow. Chief, talk to me, since we're seeing the chaos on the scene, just how Bill Brad was on, the commissioner was on with me just before the commercial break, and he was talking about how big and complicated this investigation is now. Can you talk us through why that is?
Well, first of all, Bill would know, and he ran NYPD twice, so he certainly understands and knows the complexity of it. But New York is such a large city. The transit system is so large. It is a target for terrorism, obviously. So anything that happens in New York, there's a heightened sense of urgency to find out what is taking place, who may be responsible, is it connected to something else. You have a lot of your federal agencies right there in the city of New York, so they're going to obviously respond. So coordination is something that they practice. It may look chaotic, but actually, as far as the people who are actually involved, they're using intimate command. They know who's responsible for what. They're just trying to get the message they want to get to the public to a point where they can provide as much information as possible without actually jeopardizing anything at all. So this is a massive case, and it's going to take time to get everything coordinated. But don't think for a minute there are like a lot of chaos going on internally. They know an awful lot about what's going on already, I'm sure. And I wouldn't even be surprised if they've actually identified somebody at this point. I'm not saying they have. I'm just saying I wouldn't be surprised because you've got the very best in the world working on this case. So we'll put it together.
Absolutely. I think that Commissioner Bill Bratton is back with us as well. We know, Commissioner, that President Biden has been briefed, that DHS and the Attorney General have also been briefed. If this, and we don't know, right, but if this turns out to be terrorism, how does that change this entire situation?
It changes the thrust of the investigation in a very significant way because the FBI then comes in to take over the investigation, assisted then by the NYPD. At the moment, because it is being treated as a crime scene with the lack of information about the motive, the NYPD is the lead entity. The good news, however, is because they train and collaborate constantly, no place does it better than New York and the FBI and the other federal agencies, that whoever is leading it is assisted by a strong collaborative effort with every other agency. So at the moment, the comfort level should be that the best investigative forces in the United States are working on this one. Previous person you're talking to talked about it. It looks like chaos at the scene, but a lot of that is in fact controlled chaos in the sense that responding police, firefighters, federal agents know how to deal with these unfolding situations. And there's no place that can do it better than New York because of the resources they have. The press conference, I understand, will be held at 11:45, where we'll get preliminary information that will be factual in terms of what they know at the moment. My information is the latest count of injured is 8 people that were shot during this event, and there are other people being treated for trauma injuries as they're fleeing that train. So some of those details may change in 15 minutes when they do their news conference, but this is an unfolding story. Compounding this is the ongoing problems that New York has been having getting control of its crime and subway crime situation, trying to get people back to work in New York City. This is going to be a significant setback for that effort, certainly.
I was actually going to ask you, Commissioner, because MTA, I think, is the largest public transportation system, I think even in North America. I mean, how do you keep a massive public transit system running and safe while conducting an investigation like this? What are all the factors that you have to be considering here?
Well, a lot. I'm very intimate with it. I was chief of transit police there from 1990 to 92. So I've got a lot of experience there. I ran the one in Boston for several years before that. The subway system is extraordinarily complex. It is the largest in the United States. Pre-COVID, it was carrying 6 million people a day. Right now, about 3.5 million a day. It is an extraordinarily complex system. Even the confusion this morning as to what line this train was running on is reflective of the complexity that you have multiple lines and et cetera running on the same tracks. So from an MTA perspective, they are a significant part of this investigation, as they're going to have to shut off electricity to allow police and investigators to get into these tunnels, evacuating people out of trains that might still be stuck in tunnels. Do you wait till you can roll those trains safely into a station, or do you move people off trains and get them up to emergency exits, in which case you need to shut down the power? You could go on and on and on about the complexity of anything that happens below ground in the subway system, particularly of this magnitude, where we don't know if it's a crime or an act of terrorism at the moment.
How much of a concern is the subway system, or was it, in terms of being a target when you were commissioner?
Certainly post 9/11, the world changed for policing. It had been focused on crime and disorder. That's what I dealt with in the 90s in New York in the subway. Terrorism became an overriding factor after 9/11, to the extent that a number of the tunnel entrances, for example, going under the river, are policed 24 hours a day in a sense to try and preclude people from getting into those tubes. Recently, the city has put almost 1,000 additional officers into the subway system to deal with the rising crime and disorder concerns. And that's been added to by additional officers who are assigned there to routinely walk through stations while they're on street patrol. So the complexity of it is phenomenal. And this is going to add to that complexity, where there's now the fear of potential terrorist acts, the idea of how easy it is to pull off an act of terrorism or a crime anywhere in that system. We were very good at keeping that system safe. The crime level, when it was 6 million riders a day, was down to 6 crimes a day, down from 50 a day when I first took over in 1990 with 3.5 million riders. But the concern of terrorism was certainly heightened after 9/11. It's something, fortunately, New York, NYPD, FBI continue to focus on, continually watching for signs of that type of issue. But as the event of this morning showed, that you can try your best to defend against these actions, but they're still going to happen. That's the reality of our country at this time, our world at this time.
Well, isn't it what we always say? Law enforcement has to get it right. 99% of the time, and it just takes one bad actor one time.
That's correct. It only takes one bad actor. This, at this time, preliminarily, seems like it may be one individual using some type of smoking device as well as a firearm of some sort to inflict those 8 casualties that we're experiencing so far.
Does that, and I don't know how a different way to say it, but does that bring you some comfort if it is one person?
It does in the sense that if that in fact is what it turns out to be, and if they make a quick apprehension, till they make that apprehension, however, the fear level is going to remain very high, understandably. Is this character intent on repeating what this morning was quite clearly a successful crime, injuring, shooting possibly 8 people, and disrupting the most complex transit system in America, not only just this morning, but people tonight are going to be fearful going home, that a lot of people aren't going to take that subway system going home tonight. Because, and that's the challenge for Mayor Adams, his police commissioner, ranging from the president on down. One of the reasons the president is into this so quickly is that with concerns about terrorism potentially coming out of the Ukraine initiatives, does this have any bearing on that? And that's where the police and the FBI are going to try to very quickly let people know what this was. Was it a crime? If so, what was the motivation? If so, who did it? And then very quickly try to apprehend that person. But even apprehending that person who's clearly very comfortable using a firearm of some sort to injure 8 people, capturing that person is going to be very dangerous for law enforcement as they seek to make that apprehension.
Absolutely. Commissioner, if you could hang with me, I think we have Chief Ramsey back as well to add to this conversation. Chief, the fact that there is no better description of this suspect, at least to this point, does that suggest something to you?
Well, not really. I mean, listen, this is still early in the investigation. And so the initial description that was given, and as you mentioned earlier, even though they said they were wearing a worker's safety vest and with some mask or some kind, I guarantee you the person's still not wearing that now. I don't know what information they have. If they've got video, they're able to give a more accurate description. They may have picked up video of this individual later on, either going to the subway station or leaving the subway station. I mean, we'll get a lot more accurate information from this particular press conference. I wouldn't be overly concerned about the fact this week in time. Again, we're still in the early stages. And NYPD, believe me, they have a lot of information already, probably in this case. The question of what they can release publicly at this point in time.
That's exactly right. Commissioner Bratton, how important is it to get an accurate description out when they come out in this press conference? That has to be part of the conversation, is that you hear so many, as you mentioned earlier, so many there are different descriptions by witnesses after a chaotic event and a trauma like this. And how important is it when it comes from the commissioner, when she comes out to speak, that they get it right the first time when they describe the suspect, if they are still looking for him?
It's going to be very important as much as possible to try to pinpoint who did this. If they can get a imagery that they can then tie into potentially a name, because you don't want to end up engaging in a witch hunt. The initial description that it was a black male. Well, 25% of the population in New York is African American, so you don't want people looking at every black male on the subway as the potential shooter. So part of the challenge is to, as quickly as possible, try to, with some degree of precision, and nobody does precision policing better than the NYPD, identify a named suspect that can basically take it from the broad-based category to the much more carefully defined.
I want for everyone to let's go back inside the subway station and inside the train where according to an eyewitness, this all played out. This is video we're going to show you, and I'm going to stop talking so you can hear it as well. Video will show you of what one eyewitness sent in. So in this, you can see what looks like thick smoke. You can see people covering their faces, and you can see that it looks like the train is moving. Jonathan Wackrow is back with us. Jonathan, how important are videos like this? And you know that there's likely more than that police are going to be able to get their hands on in trying to piece this together and figure out what happened when and where.
Well, the video is going to show a lot of evidence or a lot of items of evidentiary value for investigators. But I think, it's important to look at, the stress that these individuals are going through in this video that we're watching. There's a physiological and psychological effect to stressful situations. So, in the moment of a critical incident like this, investigators are very mindful of that. Immediately after going through a traumatic situation like that, to try to pull out items or descriptions of potential witnesses, investigators know that they may not be getting all of the information that's necessary. That's why for investigations, literally at a crime scene, there's overlapping lines of effort that are put forth to try to identify who the individual was. So I think it's really important to understand that these people that we're witnessing on these videos. I mean, we're watching near real time that trauma occurring to them. I mean, that was in one train car where there was smoke. We had gunfire. We had injured victims. So this is a very stressful situation, and the care of those individuals afterwards, right? So we know that there have been people who have been physically injured, but there are also going to be a lot of people mentally injured. And this incident broadly for the city of New York, who has faced terror attacks in the past, this is a harsh reminder that these incidents are dynamic and they can happen at any moment in time. And again, this is going to raise the stress level across the city. So what we're going to witness, I think, coming out in this press conference is the police commissioner. She is going to try to reassure the communities at large that the NYPD, working with their law enforcement partners, are in control of the situation. They are working to identify this suspect, and that the consequence management program that is longstanding in the city of New York and how they work with these agencies is in effect to make this city secure. I think it's also just one final point here. It's important to note that what we heard from Commissioner Ramsey and Commissioner Bratton is that there could be a multitude of causes for this incident, but the consequences are often the same. Their loss of life, their injury of innocent victims. So what we have to think about is that the city of New York remains safe because the consequence management program that has been put into place works. We're seeing that real time play out. And I would suspect that we have a suspect in custody, hopefully in the very near future.
Yeah, hopefully is exactly right. All right, so what you all, as Jonathan was talking, we just received an updated number from FDNY, just as Commissioner Bratton suspected, and he said he had been hearing, which is 16 people injured, 8 people shot. That is up from the 5 that we had been told previously at this subway station in Brooklyn. And here's what we're going to do now. This press conference is really going to start.
Tous les jours, du lundi au vendredi, suivez sur nos plateformes en ligne Zoom Haïti News, nos différentes éditions de nouvelles en provenance d'Haïti et partout ailleurs. Pas besoin d'attendre des heures pour être informé. Zoom Haïti est là et vous présente l'information en temps réel. À votre disposition, des professionnels. Rejoignez-nous sur Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. Informez-vous sur notre site internet www.zoomhaitinews.com. Les infos sont disponibles en 104 langues. Partout où il y a des Haïtiens, nous sommes là. Zoom Haiti News. L'humain avant tout.
Zoom Haiti News et Caribbean Television Network, plus de 10 sites internet en anglais, français, espagnol et plus d'une centaine d'autres langues. Désormais, vous n'avez plus besoin d'un ordinateur ou d'un téléphone portable. Il suffit de demander à Alexa.
Alexa, what are the latest news from the Caribbean Television Network?
From Caribbean Television Network News. From Zoom Haiti News Daily.
En Zoom Haiti News, français.
En Zoom Haiti News espagnol.
Caribbean Television Network, en français, anglais et espagnol. Vous pouvez aussi télécharger les applications de Zoom Haiti News en créole, français, anglais et espagnol. Visitez notre site internet sur www.caribbeantelevisionnetwork.com.
Alexa, what are the latest news from the Caribbean Television Network?
From Caribbean Television Network News. Even in his inability to lead, Ariel Henry enjoys the support of the United States. From Zoom Haiti News Daily. The Assistant Secretary of State for International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs, Todd D. Robinson, reiterated the United States' support for the Haitian government in the fight against insecurity.
Zoom Haiti News, français. L'ex-ministre de l'Agriculture, des Ressources naturelles et du Développement rural, David Nicolas, est mort.
En Zoom Haiti News español. El gobierno de Biden agradece la colaboración de las autoridades haitianas en la gestión del expediente de migrantes irregulares devueltos al país.
Ou même qu'à vivre États-Unis, Canada, ak n'importe côté dans le monde là, ou capable suivre Kounia, toute nouvelle ak l'autre programme Zoom Haiti News yo sur Roku TV ak Amazon TV Fire. Zoom Haiti News, qui est correspondant dans 10 départements géographiques pays d'Haïti, Saint-Domingue, Brésil ak Chili. Zoom Haiti News, depuis ses côtés haïtiens yé, nous là.
Ou pas jamais devant deux situations, par contre, qui ça pour faire, qui ça pour choisir?
Mais ça son dilemme. Dilemme dans couple, dilemme dans famille. Dilemme, c'est une émission débat sentimental sur une série de sujets tabous dans la société noire. Dilemme, c'est une émission morale côté d'un parler de ça qui est normal avec ça qui pas normal, ça nous capable accepter et ça nous pas droit accepter dans une relation. Relez-nous, voyez message pour participer. Rendez-vous chaque samedi soir à 10h sur page Facebook Zoom Haiti News avec Miss Lamou, Léonie Desroses. En nous parler de dilemme yo et joindre une solution ensemble. Tout dilemme, c'est dilemme. Pas oublier, chaque samedi soir, 10h, dilemme, facebook.com, Zoom Haiti News.
Chaque vendredi, depuis le fait Neven à souhait, rendez-vous pas l'autre côté. Branchez Zoom Haiti News à Caribbean Television Network qui présenté au Parole la santé. Yon émission qui peut pi bien comprendre problème santé monde là a fait face et puis permettre prendre disposition pour qu'un bête en santé. Chaque vendredi, Zoom Haiti News ak Front Unit a une consultation gratis. Pas rater occasion ça. Parole la santé après passer chaque dimanche à Nevena Souhait. Émission ça, c'est Zoom Haiti News ak Front Unit qui porte le pour.
La jeunesse vient tande. Yo di Covid ale, mais c'est pas vrai. Virus là, l'a muté, l'a transformé et l'a continué vers le terrain. L'a évolué rapidement et c'est nous toutes qui pour mobiliser pour nous couper coronavirus ça. On nous continue prendre toutes mes précautions nous te kan prend déjà yo. Si vous pas vacciné, al prend vaccin. Si vous te prend des premières doses, al prend booster. Toujours songer mettre masque. Lavez-moi souvent. Évitez en l'enfoule sous déjà un problème santé. Renforcer le système immunitaire.
This is CNN Breaking News.
All right, we're continuing to follow the breaking news out of New York City. New York authorities are set any second now to be holding their first briefing on the shooting attack at that Brooklyn subway station. I was just going to try to listen in. It looks like they're still doing checks to make sure everyone's ready to go. And then they will be beginning this press conference. What we know right now, right before break, we had an update, 8 people shot, 16 people injured. We also have new pictures that just came in. We're going to look at these together for the first time. This is a picture from inside the station. You can see very clearly people sitting in the station. It also looks like you see smoke, but most importantly, you can see people injured after this attack. And this, another image that we've seen, blood on the floor. Looks like it is inside that train car. We know from an eyewitness that we've heard from that one thing that he noted, he said there was a lot of blood on the floor of that train car. So many details not known, but we've heard from this eyewitness that was on CNN earlier that it started in the train car. Smoke filled the car and shots rang out, and people were trying to crush up against the other side of the train car, understandably trying to get away from the gunfire. And then you can imagine the chaos that ensued when the train arrived at the at the subway station and the doors opened and then they came out. Right now, we're standing by for this press conference with me right now. Nope, still hasn't started yet. Joining me right now is Jonathan Wackrow. He's still with me, as well as Chief Charles Ramsey. Chief, we see these new images. It just, I think, brings it back to, is this investigation is underway. A manhunt is underway. We still don't have yet an identity or any more information about the suspect. But just to remember that now we have 8 people shot in probably what was really an instant inside a train car, Chief.
Yeah, well, then again, that just goes to point to the issue that was raised earlier, and that is early in an investigation, all the information you receive is inaccurate. A lot of the people who were listed as injured, many were injured during a stampede, if you will, as they're trying to leave the train. They may not have even known they were shot until they had a chance to be checked, depending on the nature of the injury. So, this is probably a much more accurate number that we have now. 8 actually shot, 16 injured in total than we had before. But yeah, we're going to find out a lot more. I believe that we're going to hear a lot from NYPD during this particular press conference. So we'll have a lot more information that'll really kind of firm up a lot of these numbers and information that we have so far.
And Chief, just talk to me, because I know a lot of people see the cameras standing by, the microphones set up. We've been standing by waiting for a press conference, since this morning when really this all started to unfold. And people will wonder, why is it taking so long for the police to come out and give us an update? What is going on behind the scenes before they come out when they know that the eyes of the world are going to be on them?
Well, first of all, the information they give has to be factual, it has to be accurate, and they want to make sure it's accurate. And you have to remember, this is still unfolding. More information is still pouring in as we speak. And so is that information that's going to be relevant, that they need to get out, or is it something that's going to change some of the information they already have? So you have all these things going on right now. I wouldn't be overly concerned about it. I know everybody wants to kind of find out more. But when they come out, they'll have as much information as they can possibly have at that point in time. And again, an hour from now, 2 hours from now, some of that may change. I mean, we want to get information out as quickly as possible, but these investigations are very dynamic, and information can change slightly as you move through the investigation. So they're really just trying to make sure they have all their facts and have everything straight, and be able to provide as much information to the public as they possibly can, accurate information to the public.
Absolutely right, Chief. Jonathan, I've been wanting to ask you, one of your specialties is assessing risk and assessing threat. In the subway, at least, especially maybe New York subway, is it either particularly vulnerable or a particularly attractive target? What is it about subways?
Well, Kate, that's a great question. And, subways and public transportation, represent soft targets. So whether it's the subway platform, the subway itself, while there may be police presence, these are not, fortified locations. They don't have an increased level of security. So anytime you have locations that have where the general public congregates in mass, that is not defended, can be a target of interest for somebody with nefarious intent. This is a challenge when you look at the size and scope of the transportation system in and across not only New York, but every major metropolitan city in the United States. Defending and securing those transportation systems is a daunting task by any law enforcement entity. So it presents opportunities for individuals, and we have seen it in the past. Transportation hubs have been the target of terrorist attacks in the past. They'll continue to be so in the future because they do represent a soft target, and they're an elevated risk.
Absolutely. Chief, we know Bryn Gingras said earlier that the governor, Kathy Hochul, she's on the ground. She'll be there. One thing people should also remember is that the mayor, New York City's Mayor Eric Adams, is not going to be there. He just tested positive for COVID, so he's in isolation. Does that complicate this response at all?
I think it does to an extent of just information flow and so forth. He's the kind of individual, I don't know him personally, but just from what I've seen so far, he obviously wants to stay on top of everything. So there's a flow of information that has to get to him, coordination, and so forth. Someone will be speaking on his behalf, I would imagine, at the actual press conference. So it complicates it, but not so much that you can't get things done, but obviously it would be much better and work much smoother if he were physically on the scene. And right now it's killing him that he's not at the scene. I know, because something like this, you want to be there, because information you receive via telephone or what have you, it's just not the same as actually being on the scene and seeing what's going on. So I'm sure that that's something that they have to deal with. That's
absolutely the case. Chief, what I think it'd be quite interesting to ask a chief what you would ask another chief. What would be your top question when NYPD comes to the microphones in any moment now?
Well, knowing what she can say and what she can't say, but right now I would really focus on whether or not they have an accurate description of the individual involved. Is there a description that could be given out publicly? Is there anything else that can be done? Do you have a photo of this individual? So it's a person of interest. If someone in the public might say, oh, that's so-and-so, and be able to provide information, but knowing who this individual is. But it's going to start off with her giving a lot of basic information as far as what they know, what took place as they know it, what time, how many people were injured, the extent of those injuries, all those kinds of things will probably be what really starts it off when she gets an opportunity to speak. But I'm sure the elected officials will probably go first. But one of the first things I'd want to know from her is all the information that they possibly have on the suspect, because that's the most important thing. That's the person you got to get your hands on.
Absolutely right, and that is the most urgent. That is the most urgent thing at hand, which is there is a suspect at large. That's at least what we know right now. A manhunt underway, and to this point, a pretty vague description of what they are looking for that they've put out publicly. And also unknown is the condition of the 8 people who were shot. The condition is the 8 people shot is part of that 16 people injured total. Just for clarity for everyone. And what is their condition? What is the nature of their wounds and their injuries from those gunshots? All questions that people want to know. Jonathan, what are the tools at their disposal to conduct this manhunt, kind of behind the scenes, if you will?
Well, listen, I think one of the greatest tools that investigators have right now is the people of New York, right? And I think that Commissioner Ramsey and Commissioner Bratton both had stated earlier in the previous segment, you see something, say something. This is an individual that is at large, on the run. So anybody that is acting anonymous, having anomalous behavior in and around New York City, that looks like they're an individual that is in flight, that needs to be reported back to not only NYPD but any law enforcement entity immediately. And it goes a little bit deeper than this. The Secret Service in the past, the National Threat Assessment Center, has done a study about mass attacks in public spaces. And one of the key metrics here is that in 75% of the cases that were studied, the attacker actually made what's known as concerning communications. They had indicated or telegraphed a violent act in the past. So this is where the public's assistance in working with the NYPD, federal and state investigators, is really important to raise up anything that may be suspicious. See something, say something, report it. That's one of the big key factors to success in resolving the matter.
Absolutely. All right. So we are standing by for this very first briefing from the top officials on the scene, from the authorities on this attack on the subway. 8 people shot in this subway attack in Brooklyn. We'll jump out of the break if we need to when this briefing begins. We'll be right back.
tous les jours. Du lundi au vendredi, suivez sur nos plateformes en ligne Zoom Haïti News, nos différentes éditions de nouvelles en provenance d'Haïti et partout ailleurs. Pas besoin d'attendre des heures pour être informé. Zoom Haïti est là et vous présente l'information en temps réel. À votre disposition, des professionnels. Rejoignez-nous sur Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. Informez-vous sur notre site internet www.zoomhaitinews.com. Les infos sont disponibles en 104 langues. Partout où il y a des Haïtiens, nous sommes là. Zoom Haiti News. L'humain avant tout.
Zoom Haiti News et Caribbean Television Network, plus de 10 sites internet en anglais, français, espagnol et plus d'une centaine d'autres langues. Désormais, vous n'avez plus besoin d'un ordinateur ou d'un téléphone portable. Il suffit de demander à Alexa.
Alexa, what are the latest news from the Caribbean Television Network?
From Caribbean Television Network News. From Zoom Haiti News Daily.
En Zoom Haiti News, français.
En Zoom Haiti News espagnol.
Caribbean Television Network, en français, anglais et espagnol. Vous pouvez aussi télécharger les applications de Zoom Haiti News en créole, français, anglais et espagnol. Visitez notre site internet sur www.caribbeantelevisionnetwork.com. Chaque jour, branchez Zoom Haiti News à Caribbean Television Network sous Roku et Amazon TV5. Ou nous tous sous ZHN Live, ak CTN Live, dans Roku, ak Amazon TV5. Ou pas gain télévision? Al droite sous Apple Store ou bien Google Store, téléchargez l'application Roku. L'offre télécharger l'application ça, ou chercher ZHN Live. Ou vous même channel ça tout dans Amazon.
Very sober news day. We begin and we can show you live pictures in New York. A bloody attack on a Brooklyn subway station. We are waiting to hear any moment now to hear from New York City officials, including the police commissioner, likely the fire commissioner as well. At least 8 people were shot. Another 8 were injured. A smoke device exploding at the scene in that subway. And as of this moment, the suspect still at large. We're getting some new disturbing images from this subway. What you're about to see is quite graphic. Right in the rush hour, you see right there blood splashed across the train car floor. Another picture shows multiple victims. One person is seen putting pressure on a wound to his leg. The incident happened here, the 36th Street subway station, in the middle of the morning rush hour. The NYPD says best information is there are no active explosive devices at that scene. Witnesses describe a loud and chaotic scene. Too many shots to count, they say. Police say the shooter was wearing a gas mask and an orange construction vest. CNN Shimon Prokopis is right there live on the scene for us as we await to hear from these officials. Shimon, what do we know?
Yeah, terrifying morning here, certainly, John, for folks riding the subway to work, to get home. This is the Sunset Park area of Brooklyn. And what we hear is that this morning, according to officials, there was this smoke bomb, some kind of a smoke device that the suspect set off on the train, and then the gunfire started. And as you said, reports of 16 people injured, 8 of them shot. We're told one of them seriously injured. I'm also told that some of the people who have been injured suffered smoke inhalation injuries. So this from this device that this person set off. So that is why some of the people were taken to the hospital. And also some people just fleeing from the scene, fleeing for their lives in this terrifying moment. They got injured as well. The suspect, all we know, according to police, is that he was wearing a gas mask and this orange reflective construction type vest, obviously indicating that there was some kind of premeditation. And that is why we're seeing this response here from city officials, from the FBI and the ATF, the Joint Terrorism Task Force on scene. We don't yet know, John, the motive, whether this is terrorism or something else here. Obviously, the fact that the JTTF is on scene, that is significant. And as you said, hopefully we'll get more details here from officials once they come to the mics. We expect that press conference to start at any moment. But obviously, one of the big things out here has been just this enormous response from the NYPD. When you think about the subway system here in New York City, it is the lifeline of this city. And anytime there's any kind of attack, shooting, crime, it always gets a lot of attention because it is the lifeline of the city. So many people relying on it to get to home, to get to work. And that is why this is such a significant incident here in New York City. And that is why we're waiting for the FBI and the NYPD, as well as transit officials, all together. We're just waiting for some more of those officials to get together so they can together hold this press conference. They are still, as far as we know, looking for this suspect. And that is something that police obviously are still out there looking for this man. And so that is what we know at this point. And hopefully shortly we will learn more here, John, from officials.
Shimon, stand by with us as we continue the conversation. I want to bring in to join us to get their expertise the former Deputy Director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe, and the former Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security, Juliette Kayyem. And we're also told Governor Kathy Hochul will be at this press conference, as well as the local, the police, the fire, and the transit officials. Juliette, let me start with you. Shimon just teed it up. Obviously, this is New York City. We live in the post 9/11 age. So the Joint Terrorism Task Force is there. The police department is there. The fire department is there. When you're responding to a scene like this and you don't know, what do you have to deploy to answer your questions?
You're going to go all in at this stage, especially because it's New York and it's the subway system, because you can't close the city for too long. It's weird to imagine, but they're already thinking about how do we reopen because the city has to survive. So basically with subway security, it can't get much more secure. You cannot have a vibrant urban environment and back checks or whatever. So there's cameras, there's physical presence. Once this detonation once the shooting happens, and remember, we are talking serious premeditation. He appears to have been dressed, and there's also some sort of smoke bomb. We don't know exactly what it is. You're basically right now, you want to save the lives you can. The second bomb, and then the separate.
We're having some issues with the connection to Juliette Kayyem. Let me, as we fix that, bring Andrew McCabe into the conversation. Andy, 8:30 this morning is when the fire department responded. So we're talking 3.5 hours later, plus a few minutes. So between then and now, in terms of the cameras in the area, interviewing eyewitnesses, what are your questions as we wait to hear?
Well, John, we had a big development in our understanding of the story when we heard from those witnesses who indicated that the shooting and the deployment of the smoke device actually took place on the subway car as it was traveling from 59th Street to 36th Street. So that takes what we thought from initial reports was a very localized scene at on the platform of 36th Street and turns it into something that happened, that basically stretches your crime scene out across the entirety of the subway system almost in terms of looking for the perpetrator of this attack, right? Investigators are now looking at likely video capture at every single subway stop along the N and the R line in which an individual matching this guy's description could possibly be seen. That is a lot of very hard logistical work and video analysis. They're, of course, asking all those sorts of questions to the victims and the witnesses who might have been on the train. They're trying to round up where those people are. We understand that many of them were kind of hustled onto another R train and sped out of the area in the midst of the incident. So they've got a lot of work to do in terms of identifying and rounding up all those folks that could present them with leads that need following up.
And in terms of bringing those resources to bear, Juliette Kayyem, you were back with us. You mentioned New York City. Obviously, we have the 9/11 experience. We have other terrorism experiences. Right. So you have both tabletop exercises done routinely to coordinate between the state, local, and federal law enforcement agencies. And unfortunately, in New York, more than most other places, you have real life experience. How does that come together in the moment when the bell sounded this morning saying incident subway station?
It's the transit police. It's well before the NYPD. There's so many different jurisdictions within New York. So it's going to be the transit police and any presence that was there that should have made a call. This is my one question. Should have made a call about shutting down all the subways in that area. We don't know how the perpetrator left the subway system. That should have been shut down. That would have been trained for. People should have known to do that. You want to keep the perpetrator. You want to catch him. So that's going to be a big question: is how did he get out? Was it chaos? Did he get on another train, or was he able to leave the station? All of them not great. And then you have the NYPD surging resources. The NYPD is so strong. Their emergency management enforcement team is so strong and the fire department, it is unlikely they need many state resources. This looks like it's done, knock on wood. We're not anticipating other attacks. And so that's basically, it probably will stop at the New York area. There's a separate piece, as Andrew was talking about, which is going to be the federal investigation.
Another issue there with the connection with Juliet Kayyem. Let's get back to Shimon Prokopis, who's right there on the scene for us. And Shimon, you're listening to Juliet and Andy talk about bring their law enforcement expertise to bear. You are seeing with your own eyes, and I've been watching some of the video, at different times, different teams of investigators, and you can see the different shirts. So there's both local and federal going down into the station, searching the area. Tell us the latest of what you're seeing right there.
So what makes this different, John, and why the JTTF would be involved is because of that device, right? Whether it was a smoke device, whether it was some kind of more sinister device that was meant to go off and that didn't. All indications are obviously that this was a smoke device. But when you think about the location, given that it's the subway, the train here in New York City, which has been a terrorism target, and it's one of these things that obviously is what officials are always concerned about, attacks in the subway. So that's why you're seeing this kind of response as well, because of what was used, that smoke device, and given the number of people shot. So, normally when you have shootings, and sadly there's been so many shootings here in the subways and attacks in the subway, you won't see the FBI respond, obviously, because it's an NYPD issue. But given this device that was used, and we need more clarity on exactly what was used. I've heard from officials describe it in different ways. So what we really need to hear on the record from law enforcement as to what exactly it was. The way this attack unfolded is very concerning for officials because it would almost indicate some level of planning. The fact that this suspect had a gas mask, the fact that he had this orange vest, and then obviously this device.
Shimon, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We need to take you to this press conference right here on the scene in New York City. Let's listen.
You're going to hear from First Deputy Mayor Lorraine Grillo, Governor Kathy Hochul, Police Commissioner Keyshawn Sewell will outline the events as we know them. Laura Kavanaugh, the First Deputy Commissioner and Acting Fire Commissioner, will walk you through casualties.
Andy McCabe, as we wait, they're doing the introduction of who's about to speak here. As you bring in, what is the most important thing for these officials to bring forward out of the gate? Is it whether they know the identity of the suspect? Is it that they've cleared the subways?
They got to address the subject. If they have somebody in custody,
Here we go. I'm sorry, Andy. Let me interrupt. This is the Deputy Mayor of New York City.
Let's listen. From the very minute this incident occurred, the mayor and I have been on the phone monitoring the situation constantly. We have worked with all of our agencies, the FDNY, NYPD, OEM, all of the agencies who have worked really hard together, and we continue to throw all of the city's resources at this situation. We've made all of the resources available, and we'll work with the Office of Emergency Management for any additional needs. I'm going to ask the Police Commissioner, Keyshawn Sewell, to speak to you and give you an update on the events of today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. We're here to update New Yorkers about an active shooting incident that took place this morning inside the 36th Street subway station on the N line. I want to begin by assuring the public that there are currently no known explosive devices on our subway trains, and this is not being investigated as an act of terrorism at this time. We can also report that although this was a violent incident, reportedly we have no one with life-threatening injuries as a result of this case. This investigation is only hours old, so please note this information is subject to change. Just before 8:24 this morning, as a Manhattan-bound N train waited to enter the 36th Street station, an individual on that train donned what appeared to be a gas mask. He then took a canister out of his bag and opened it. The train at that time began to fill with smoke. He then opened fire, striking multiple people on the subway and in the platform. Again, we will describe him as an individual. He is being reported as a male black, approximately 5 feet 5 inches tall with a heavy build. He was wearing a green construction type vest and a hooded sweatshirt. The color is gray. At this time, we are working with our federal partners, where we are asking for the public's help. Anyone with information, videos, or photographs, no matter how insignificant they think it may be, is encouraged to call Crime Stoppers at 800-577-TIPS. All calls are strictly confidential. I'd like to turn it over to the FDNY to give information about the victims. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. The governor would like to speak now. Governor Hochul, my apologies.
That's right. Good afternoon. This morning, ordinary New Yorkers woke up in anticipation of a relatively normal day. They left their homes en route to school, en route to their jobs, and to a normal day, as I mentioned. That sense of tranquility and normalness was disrupted, brutally disrupted, by an individual so cold-hearted and depraved of heart that they had no caring about the individuals that they assaulted as they simply went about their daily lives. This individual is still on the loose. This person is dangerous. They're asking individuals to be very vigilant and alert. You'll get more reports on specificity as the day goes on. So this is an active shooter situation right now in the city of New York. I just got off the phone with the mayor. He's recovering well. He is monitoring. He's actively engaged in this situation. I wanted to let him know that the people of the entire state of New York stand with the people of this city, this community, and we say no more. No more mass shootings. No more disrupting lives. No more creating heartbreak for people just trying to live their lives as normal New Yorkers. It has to end, and it ends now. And we are sick and tired of reading headlines about crime, whether they're mass shootings or the loss of a teenage girl or a 13-year-old. It has to stop. I'm committing the full resources of our state to fight this surge of crime, this insanity that is seizing our city, because we want to get back to normal. It has been a long, hard 2 years. That's what we crave, that sense of stability and normalcy. And this is what the mayor and I are going to continue to work toward. And I thank the partners, the brave people of the MTA, the first ones who had the sense, the drivers of the train, to leave the station to make sure no more victims could be hurt. The NYPD, FDNY, state police, everyone involved in this has one purpose, and is to stop the insanity of these crimes. You'll hear now from our fire department. I want to thank them for being there to help us diffuse a volatile situation, but we'll be giving continued reports as this day unfolds. Again, we ask everyone to be careful, be cautious, report what you see. It is likely that someone out there listening to this is going to help us, lead us to that individual. You have a description of what they're wearing. You know the details. But this is the day we pull together as New Yorkers, united in a common purpose to say no more. And that is what I'm going to continue to do as the governor of the state of New York, working with our local partners right here. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon. This morning, the FDNY received reports of gunshot victims in the subway. Thanks to their quick response, we were able to treat 16 patients. 10 of those patients are suffering from gunshot wounds at this time, and 5 of them are in critical but stable condition in our local hospitals.
Can you say that again?
Yes, we have 16 total patients. 10 of them are suffering from gunshot wounds, and 5 of them are in critical but stable condition at this time. And I'm going to pass it over to the MTA for an update on their subways.
Okay. First of all, we have to thank the NYPD and the FDNY and the whole team who've done so much to protect us and help immediately to recover from this situation. And I also need to acknowledge the MTA workers who had the foresight to immediately move a train that was on the platform, the R train, out of the station so it could carry people to safety. That was smart thinking. Right now, B service is suspended, W service is suspended. The D and the N and the R are running with suspensions and some shuttle buses. And folks should check the website for latest. Obviously, it's a disrupted day, but a lot of the system is in fact running. I just want to say one thing on a personal note, which is on 9/11, I stood on 4th Avenue and watch people, New Yorkers, come back from that tragedy. And I thought I watched New Yorkers help each other and storekeepers walk out and give people water. That was the same thing we saw on the platform today. We saw New Yorkers in a difficult situation, in emergency, helping each other. That's the subway riders. That's who New Yorkers are. Every day they're showing people in the subway, which is our public space, that New Yorkers of all varieties can come together in small spaces and get along and create something bigger. That's what we remember in these emergencies, as well as the tragedy and the thought for the quick recovery of the victims, is New Yorkers are incredibly resilient, just as they are in every emergency. And we thank them for what they've done. And we thank the governor and the mayor for their leadership in all of our recovery from COVID and from every one of these challenges.
So just to reiterate, we're going to be very limited in what we are able to answer in questions. Just to also underline our partners here, we got Mike Regan. Mike Regan is the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Joint Terrorism Task Force with the FBI and NYPD. John DeVito from ATF, who's helping us with tracing efforts and investigation. He's the Special Agent in charge for New York City. We have the Brooklyn District Attorney, Eric Gonzalez, who is also here. And of course, Chief Ken Corey, Chief of Department, and First Deputy Commissioner Ed Caban. We'll start off with questions for the police commissioner.
On the train, was the shooting on the train or on the platform? Was the suspect on the platform or in the train? And did it all happen in the 36th Street station, or what happened down at 25th Street?
The suspect was in the train car. The shooting began in the train car.
Commissioner, can you give us some more detail exactly what happened in the car? Did the suspect say anything? What type of weapon did he have? And what was going on inside the car as this all happened?
So as I stated before, we're only able to get limited information because it's under investigation. As the train was pulling into the station, the subject put on a gas mask. He then opened a canister that was in his bag, and then the car filled with smoke. After that, he began shooting.
Hang on. Go.
Does this appear to be random? Any idea why this individual did this and did this here?
We do not know the motive at this time, but we're not ruling anything out.
The injuries that are not gunshots, are they shrapnel wounds? What are the other injuries that were not gunshots?
Fire
I
department.
want the fire department.
There are a variety of other injuries, from smoke inhalation to shrapnel to panic from the incident.
When you say shrapnel, what would the shrapnel come from?
It could be from anything. It's still under investigation at this time, so it could be a grazing from a bullet. It could be from the panic after following the incident.
Not from an explosive device?
Not at this time. No.
Any idea the suspect where they go to the train tracks and they get out of the station? Any idea of the whereabouts immediately?
That's subject to investigation. We're endeavoring to determine that right now.
Okay, Josh.
Why
John, Commissioner, why do you connect this more to the litany of gun violence and not terrorism at this stage? Why rule out terrorism?
I'm not ruling out anything. We're determining what that motive is, and we'll find that out as the investigation continues.
Victims tend to one particular ethnic group?
No, sir. The victims have a variety of ethnic backgrounds.
Hang on. We got time for about two more.
Why were the trains not shut down immediately? And if they were, could it have been easier to catch the suspect?
That's not the case.
How were
Next.
the cameras working in the subway station?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Were the cameras working in the subway station?
That's under investigation as we speak.
How
Because it's too-
worker, given that they were wearing a construction vest?
We have not identified the subject. He was wearing a green type construction
Governor
vest.
Hochul, do you want to comment on the arrest of your Lieutenant Governor Brian Benjamin? Did he speak to you this morning? Will you continue to detain him?
I'll be happy to report on it later today. We'll have a statement out there. I've not had a chance to speak to him. I was on the media interviews this morning. But this is not the place, but I will be addressing it very shortly. Let's focus on the fact that there are people in a hospital right now fighting for their lives. Those are the people we're thinking about and praying for at this moment.
All right, thank you very much. Now listen, we're going to get, hang on a second. We're going to get back to you with a time for an update later. The information is developing. We expect to have more later, and that will not be here. That will be...
You're listening here, police officials wrapping up a quick news conference outside of the scene of a horrific subway shooting this morning. New York, the governor there, the deputy mayor, the New York City, and the NYPD commissioner updating on that Brooklyn subway attack. Some very important things that we learned. Number one, most importantly, the suspect is still at large. He is described as a heavy-set black gentleman, approximately 5'5" described by eyewitnesses at the scene. 16 victims, 10 suffering from gunshot wounds, 5 in critical but stable condition, but remarkably, the deputy mayor saying none believed to be life-threatening injuries. The Deputy Fire Commissioner, excuse me, saying that not life-threatening at this time. This from the police commissioner, significant, not being investigated. This shooting not being investigated as an act of terrorism at the moment, although the commissioner did say the investigation is still continuing, no known motive. There are no known explosives on the train. The transit saying most of the subway system has been reopened. There are still some suspensions. This happened at a harrowing scene just before 8:30 a.m. The train pulling into the station. Shooting started inside the train car. The suspect is said to have put on a gas mask, pulled a canister from a bag, opened that canister, smoke filled the train, and then the shooting started to break out. Let's bring in the former D.C. and Philadelphia Police Commissioner Charles Ramsey, who is with us right now. Chief, as you listen to that play out, most importantly, from an investigative standpoint, the suspect remains at large. What else jumped out to you, sir?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of information I thought that came out in that. The more accurate description of the shooter, male, black, 5'5", heavy build, wearing the green vest, but also a gray sweatshirt. That's going to be helpful as they start going through video, looking to see where that person got on the train, where that person went after they got off the train. So I'm sure that they've got maybe a little bit more information pertaining to that individual, but you know, they're going to hold some things close to the vest. The other thing, in fact, now we know we got 10 people shot, as opposed to 5, then 8, now it's 10. I think that's probably more the final number. It's pretty accurate. So more information is coming out in this investigation. I thought it was a good press conference. I thought John Miller did a good job, you know, kind of controlling it best he could. But there's still a lot of information that we don't have yet because it's unfolding, and it's unfolding pretty rapidly. But it seems to me like they got a lot to go on. One last thing. The fact that the person allegedly pulled out the canister, released the smoke, then started shooting, that would tell me that's not a targeted shooting. In other words, if that was a specific person they were trying to shoot, you wouldn't fill the car with smoke first and then start shooting, because you need to see who you're shooting at. So that kind of random shooting like that is, I mean, that's curious as to why somebody would do that. Other than just cause a lot of havoc and just kill people unnecessarily. So terrorism is not off the table at this point in time, I would imagine.
You say that. I was just going to ask you that because sometimes we get caught up in the language of the business, if you will, of law enforcement. The police commissioner did say it is not being investigated as an act of terrorism right now. It was certainly a terrifying event to those people on the train, but make the distinction. This is someone who had grievances, as you note, from your investigative experience. If you're going to start the smoke canister, then you're shooting more randomly. You're not there for a specific target, in your view, at least preliminarily. Why do you believe the commissioner would come out now and say it is not at this moment being investigated as an act of terrorism?
Well, I think, one, you don't want to panic the public. And quite frankly, they don't know because they don't have a motive. They don't know why this guy did this. And so you need to have a motive first, but they're not taking it off the table. And I think that's important, the way she said, you know, it's not being investigated as terrorism at this time. It's not off the table. It's a shooting investigation, obviously, but they don't know the motive yet. And they need more information before they can officially classify it. But I think that's something that you do to just kind of keep the public calm, because you just don't know. But you know, it definitely was not targeted. If it unfolded the way they're saying it unfolded, and I imagine that's based on eyewitnesses.
Chief, stand by. I want to get straight to the scene now and bring in CNN's Bryn Gingras, who has been there throughout the morning and was there for that news conference just a moment ago. Bryn, it was, as Chief Ramsey notes, a remarkable amount of information, but still some giant questions.
Yeah, there's still a lot of questions, actually, John. You know, listening to that news conference, I was kind of thinking they are just letting us know basically the description of the suspect because they have not apprehended him just yet. I still think there's a lot of unknowns, and they just wanted to kind of get that information out there circulating in the public before they could really give more details about this investigation. So I was certainly wishing to hear a little bit more, but let's put out that suspect description again. 5'5", heavy build, a black male wearing a gray hoodie, green construction vest. Now, all my sources are pretty much telling me that there are names circulating, and they're looking into this based off of video evidence, witness accounts of possible names, and it's certainly now the focus for all the law enforcement that is here on the scene. A coordinated effort is to find that suspect. But yes, it's a huge deal that they came to the cameras and told us
As of now, as you guys just pointed out, as of now, this does not look like a terrorist incident to calm some fears, maybe. But still, it's a big deal that this suspect is still on the loose, and that is the focus right now, is to find him.
Bryn Gingras on the scene for us. Stand by as well. Let's bring back in Andrew McCabe, the former deputy director of the FBI. Andrew, you heard as the press conference played out, essentially phase one, get to the scene, see what's happening. Phase two, treat the wounded. Remarkably, no life-threatening injuries believed at this point. Where are we now as you move into the next phase? Obviously, the suspect is still at large, and as they were going through the resources brought to bear there, including the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, a federal agency, which they said was helping with the tracing. Obviously, shots fired. You have 10 people who were shot, treated for gunshots, which means a number of bullets were fired. Walk us through how that process plays out.
Sure. So there's maybe the two major areas where law enforcement are directing their resources right now, John, are first processing the crime scenes, right? And this is an extensive scene. You have the shooting allegedly took place on the moving train. And then, of course, the victims and possibly the subject himself empty out onto the platform. So they've got a lot of work to do there. So that's in one column. The second side of the investigation right now, of course, is trying to find that subject. We just heard Bryn indicate that they already possibly have some potential names of people that they might be looking for. That's a good sign. I would expect that those are any information they do have is likely derived from reviewing video footage. I'm sure that they are looking at all of the video capture from any of the stations prior to the 34th Street station on both the N and the R trains, because the subject could have entered that train at any number of a bunch of different stations across the subway system. So it's an intensive effort. It's very broadly based right now, but ultimately it is that video capture that'll bring them to the best information about who the subject is. Once you know who he is, then you got to find him.
And Andy McCabe, I want to ask you the same question I was asking Chief Ramsey, who says he believes it's to reassure the public and keep them calm. The police commissioner in New York, Keechant Sewell, did come out pretty quickly and say this at the moment, she said subject to change, but at the moment, not being investigated as an act of terrorism. Explain to viewers who might not understand the distinction.
Sure. So I agree with Chief Ramsey that was likely an effort by the police commissioner to kind of calm people down. And it probably reflects the fact that at this point, they probably don't have any specific information that ties this event to a terrorist group or a terrorist organization. So in other words, they don't have a claim of responsibility from a group like ISIS or Al-Qaeda, or they don't know who the subject is. And so therefore, they're not sure if the subject has any historical connections to terrorism. However, the most important thing is that your terrorism resources are involved in the investigation from the very first step. We know that's the case because the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force is on scene working this investigation with their partners. And that's really all we need to know right now. Any chance that this is terrorism related will be fully vetted by those investigators. And we'll see over the next few days if any information along those lines comes out.
Let's bring back Juliette Kayyem, our Homeland Security expert and analyst, into the conversation as well. So Juliette, it's the what next piece that plays out. The initial response is to get there and assess the situation and help those who have been hurt or injured. Now the question of how much of this is shoe leather police work and how much of it is technology.
It will be a combination of all of them. I want to try to put some of the pieces together because I thought one of the statements at the end of the press conference confused a lot of the narrative. The police department comes out and says they're not investigating it as terrorism, and as importantly, they say there's no continuing threat. What that would say to me is that they have a sense of who it is, and they know who that person is for reasons unrelated to terrorism, because they came out super early saying that. About 20 minutes later, at the very end, they say they're not ruling out terrorism. I think that's right. You wouldn't want to rule it out. But it does tell me that from the beginning, they are positioning this as, and I'm not saying this is good news, a mass shooting event and not a politically motivated one. These are important distinctions, I think, as Chief Ramsey was saying, for, in terms of what is New York actually facing again. That doesn't make it any better or less terrifying for the city and the people on the subway. So the investigation will be ongoing. It looks like they have a limited number of injured. This is not going to stretch New York's hospital systems in the way that obviously 9/11 did or the Boston Marathon did here. And they will continue to help those who are hopefully continue to be in good condition. And now the investigation will be both foreign. Are there any ties? Do they know who the suspect is? And then what is that footprint in terms of physical and internet? I want to say one thing. All of the training I've ever done or led on mass transit attacks would have had the system shut down immediately. And what is going to be very interesting to review is what happened at that moment in terms of where the suspect was able to go and how he was able to escape. I don't blame anyone in the moment of something bad happening, but it is going to be a lesson learned, because that is what you do when a system is attacked. You shut it down, and how the perpetrator got out is unclear.
Well, let's bring in Chief Ramsey on that point. Chief, you've been the police chief, the police commissioner in 2 cities with subway systems, mass transit systems, also with very densely populated urban areas. So walk us through in terms of the uniqueness or the specialties of the search now, the challenges of the search when you have a subway system and B, a densely populated area.
Well, video is going to be incredibly important. You know, trains run on schedule. And so they know the route that the train takes. They know what time that train was at what station. They'll be able to check video from all those stations to try to find when this person got on. And they'll also be looking at all the video from the subway station where the train actually pulled in after the shooting, and look at all that footage again and try to then backtrack. Where is this person then going to? I mean, he could take off that sweatshirt, get rid of that green vest. Obviously not going to be walking down the street wearing a gas mask of some kind. And so, you know, what video evidence do they have? That's going to be incredibly important now. There's also video that people take, because people videotape everything. And so you've got a lot of people that videotape the incident. They may or may not think there's something important on that video. Anyone who was part of that, who witnessed anything, needs to contact the police, NYPD. They may not think they have good information. Let the investigators decide what information is relevant and what information isn't. But that's the challenge right now. They may very well have somebody in mind as to who they're looking for, and they're playing it close to the vest, because obviously, you know, bad guys watch TV too. And so they don't want to let too much out at this point in time. But I got a sense and a feeling that they're going to be able to narrow this down pretty quickly. At least I hope so.
And to that point, Andrew McCabe, as you come back in, the chief makes a very important point in the sense that you do have all this video and you have the suspect described as in the train car, wearing the construction vest, wearing a gray hoodie, reaching into a bag and pulling out a canister. That does not mean that person looked anything like that when he got on the train, especially if he's carrying a bag. The clothing, the hoodie and the vest could have been inside a bag. So when you're analyzing video, what is most important when an investigator knows, obviously, this person has obviously gotten rid of the hoodie, gotten rid of the gas mask? What are you looking for? The bag, shoes, pants? What is the most important thing to try to cross-identify between different pieces of video?
You're looking for all of that, John. And I thought it was really interesting that the police commissioner noted that witness observed the person don the mask in the train. So we know that he got onto the train and was not wearing the mask until the train was in motion, just prior to getting to the smoke device. And then that he reached into his bag, pulled out a canister, opened it, and deployed the smoke. So obviously a high level of planning and execution there. That tells you something about your subject, but also may give you, you would look for those cues of the gray sweatshirt and the green vest on the way into the train. But as you've noted, you may not have those on the way out. So if you can spot that person on video, let's say wearing that vest, you would then look to other things that they're wearing, shoes, pants, the backpack, that can't be changed quite so easily. And those are the indicators you would look for on potential exit videos, or, you know, videos in which they were fleeing the scene. So you definitely, we will identify the make and manufacturer and model of the backpack, of the shoes that he's wearing, of the pants that he may have. It's like, you can't imagine the level of detail that the analysts and investigators go to in really tying that stuff down.
And Juliet, the expertise is critically important, just in the sense that it is so crowded. There are so many people. The New York City subway system, the most crowded subway system of all.
Yeah. That's exactly right. I thought what was interesting and important is that about a quarter of the press conference was already talking about getting the lines running again. That's important for a city in particular, New York, but it also says something about the transit police and the NYPD's ability to isolate a crime scene, to investigate, and do one thing that's important, but also keep the city running. So the transit police will probably recede now in terms of the investigation, as Andrew and the chief are saying. That this will be led by a JTTF for now, but as I was saying earlier, it is surprising to have the NYPD come out so quickly and say it's not terrorism. They sort of refine that at the end, which is a way of saying, or I think one way to interpret it is they are far along in determining who the assailant is, and now this is just a search. Now this may not be an identification, and that's how they seem to be treating it, by saying to the city, we are not under attack. This is not another 9/11, or worse, a July 7th. Which we saw in London a few years after 2001. So that's sort of where this is going. None of it is good, but in terms of no fatalities, people seem to be stabilized, and a very focused investigation while the city unbelievably gets back to moving in just a few hours. That's pretty remarkable and shows the sophistication of the New York system.
And it's remarkable indeed. Juliet Keim, all of our analysts are going to stand by. We're going to sneak in a quick break, but we have reporters on the scene continue to develop information on this breaking news story. Again, 8:30 a.m. this morning, just before 8:30 a.m. in the middle of rush hour, a harrowing scene on a New York City subway car in Brooklyn. A man dons a gas mask, opens a smoke canister, and opens fire. More on our breaking news just ahead.